Happy Purim. Okay, we're on Chof Dalet and Aleph 24a. Last of the narrow lines. Okay, 24a, last of the narrow lines. Let's just briefly review. We had the Russian doll yesterday, nested questions.
No,
4 nested questions.
I think we're going to stuck with that down.
Oh, is that? Oh. Okay, what are the questions? The first question is, the first statement, we have a statement from Rabbi Dovid Yehudah. Rabbi Dovid Yehudah basically uses majority to determine whether or not you have to return a lost object. So if you find something in an area that's majority non-Jewish, you don't need to return it. The question is, does Rabbi Dovid Yehudah extend this even when there's majority Jews? Because ultimately speaking, it still was found in public. The second question was, do the rabbis disagree with him? If they do disagree with him, which category do they disagree with him? Do they disagree with him only in Rav Yisrael or even in Rav Kananim? And even if they disagree in those 2 categories, who does the halacha follow? And if the halacha does follow Rabbi Dovid Yehudah, in which area? In Rav Yisrael or in Rav Kananim? We're together on the questions? And very, very briefly, without nesting the questions, the question is very simple. According to both Rabbi Lazar and according to the rabbis, what is the status with majority Jews and majority non-Jews? Do you need to return a lost object or not? In other words, fundamentally, the question is, do you go based on majority? And then the second question would be is, who does the halacha follow? And in which category? In what's the halacha in majority non-Jewish? What's the halacha in majority Jewish? And again, fundamentally, the question revolves around whether or not we go by majority, and I guess in which category we would go by majority as well. So Toshma, let's try to evaluate this question. We're on 24a, last of the narrow lines. Somebody finds money in a botek knesias. So I'll avoid translating this as a shul. We'll say botek knesias is a room, a building that's used for gatherings. It's an assembly hall, right? Typically, that assembly hall is used in context of synagogue. Or b'botem midrashos. B'botem midrashos is a study hall. Again, typically the b'botem midrashos are used in the context of what we call a beis medrash, where Jews study Torah, like the one we're sitting in. Or any other place where there's a lot of people, you're allowed to keep it. Because the owners give up the possibility of finding their object. Which opinion goes by majority in a public space? From Shimon ben Elazar. So we find that clearly here, Rabbi Shimon is ruling that even in a scenario where there's majority Jews, because the study hall and the synagogue and the assembly place are presumably the Jewish beis medrash and shul, and the rule is that you find them in public, you can keep them, because majority people give up on it. So clearly we see Rabbi Shimon would extend his law even in majority Jews. If you find it in public, then you do not need to return it. So the Gemara says, we're referring to b'mefuzarim. The stuff that he found is spread out. So the Gemara says, by mefuzarim, the stuff is spread out. My area, why does it need to specifically be a scenario where the majority is present, where it's a public place? In other words, the Mishnah says you find items that are spread out, right? A guy lost, he was holding a big sack of apples and there was a small hole, right? And apples kept on dropping down. He didn't realize. The halacha is you're allowed to keep those apples. And this is the case whether it happens publicly in a major thoroughfare or even if it happens privately. So if the key idea of this brisa is a scenario where the guy lost apples like one at a time, then who cares? Why is it relevant that it was a synagogue or a study hall? It must be that it was lost as a bundle, meaning he lost the whole bag of apples. Not that there was a hole in the bag and one dropped at a time, but that the entire bag of apples was either dropped or it was sort of hidden in the study hall, in a place where he thought he'd be able to come back and get it. Okay. What are we referring to? But we're talking about the theater. We're not the but means an assembly hall, but it doesn't mean a Jewish assembly hall, which is typically called a synagogue. It means a theater, a non-Jewish assembly place, or batim midrashos, my claimer. Well, study halls, do the non-Jews have study halls? So Gemara says, yeah, batim midrashos, the done, the yasib who kananim. You're right. At that time, I guess they didn't have universities, so there was no, the chair of somebody's study hall. However, the non-Jews would often hang around the Jewish study halls. Either they worked there. In some instances, it was at the edge of the city, so they'd hang out there. And because the non-Jews hung around, so therefore there is majority. At least there's a potential for majority non-Jews, and therefore you can keep it. But you can see it's nami didan the yasi behu kananim. It could be that the Batiknesias are not just theaters, there could be synagogues, but it could be a synagogue where at times there's a majority of non-Jews present. This would be obviously when the Jews finish praying and everyone goes home and there's a couple of cleaners and security. Rashi actually says the non-Jews are there for security. I guess it's not a new thing, right? Where there's majority non-Jews, so that they presumably would take it. Again, so then this price, in effect, is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and it's majority non-Jews. So it doesn't prove anything to us. We already know that Rabbi Shimon says you find something in public with majority non-Jews, you can keep it. That there's no disagreement. The only question is a step further than that, and that we don't have any answers to. Tashma, next proof. Matzah ba'aveda. We are at 24a, but a little less than halfway through the wide lines. And again, the question we were discussing very, very briefly is, what is the story in the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and in the Rabbanon, if you find an object in a public space that's either majority Jews or majority non-Jews, and who does the halacha follow in which context? The only one we're certain of is that Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says that with majority non-Jews, you find it in public, you're allowed to keep it. We don't know.
First word on the line.
Kinesias.
In Sephardic, please.
Kinesiot.
Thank you.
Yeah, but a little less than halfway down the wide lines. Tashma. But halfway through that line. Matzah ba'aveda. Imrei Yisrael chayev. That's the first word on the line. Chayev lahachras. You find a lost object. If there's majority Jews, you have to return it. Imrei kananim. If there's majority non-Jews, ein chayev lahachras, you don't have to return it. Okay. Man shamal damar zayin basaru. But which opinion says we go by majority? Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Shema mina. We see from here. Kikam Rabbi Shimon Elazar. B'rev kananim. Of b'rev Yisrael loy. We see that Rabbi Shimon Elazar is only referencing majority non-Jews. But by majority Jews, he would say you would have to return it, even if it was lost in a public area. So Gemara says, no. Hamani Rabbanon, it could be this brisa is the rabbi's opinion, meaning the rabbis admit they consent to Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon's category with majority non-Jews. As we debated whether or not the rabbis disagree, whether they disagree by majority non-Jews or also by majority Jews. And this brisa seems to support the notion that the rabbis support the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon with majority non-Jews. So the Gemara says, "Tifshim inad Rabbi Shimon Elazar b'rev kananim." So the Gemara says, "Well, if that's the case, then we can prove that the rabbis agree to Rabbi Shimon Elazar by majority non-Jews." So the Gemara says, "No, you're right. Shimon Elazar I feel b'rev Yisrael nami." It could be it's Rabbi Shimon Elazar. In other words, so let's at least prove the rabbis agree to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon by majority non-Jews. So Gemara says, no. We could say that the entire brayso is Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Rabbi Shimon Elazar, and it could be that Rabbi Shimon Elazar holds that even by majority Jews, you still would be allowed to keep the item. However, we're talking about where the item was hidden. Okay, so what does this mean? The guy was in the the guy was in the study hall or in the shul, and I had to give my wife the keys. He has to hand over my keys to my keys. I had to give my wife my keys to the car. She came to hear Megillah landing first. So I took 2 machzarim, I pulled them out, and I put the keys behind them and put it back in. So it's an easy way for my wife to get it. Right? Now, clearly, those keys were put there intentionally. If you happen to be looking for Yom Kippur machzor, you notice 2 of them sticking out in a funny way, obviously, you know that somebody, and you see keys there, you know somebody put it there, right? It's interesting. What's the halacha in that scenario? You don't take it, obviously, right? Because if you take it, then the guy's not going to know where it went. So you don't take it. One second. Okay, so if that's the case, in other words, if the item was hidden it's a Jewish place, it's a shul, it's a public, but it's hidden. So then you don't have, in other words, so if it was majority non-Jews and it's hidden, then you do return it. So if the same thing would happen in the motor center, you looked underneath the seat, under A33, and you found the keys, then even though you found them hidden, you'd still have to take them. You'd still be allowed to keep them, because easily a non-Jew could have found them, would have taken it for himself. In a Jewish place where it's hidden, you don't take it. You let it be, because you presume that it will be safe there, and the Jew who hid it there will be able to find it. One second. Okay, so the Gemara says, but if it's hidden, why would you be taking it in the first place? We learned, okay, guy finds something in the garbage, something of value, but he finds it hidden in the garbage. So Gemara says you don't touch it. If it's exposed, then you take it and you announce it. But if it's not exposed, you don't touch it, because presumably it was hidden there intentionally. So Gemara says, what happened? It was hidden in a garbage. Now there's garbages that are dumps, they're permanent, what do you call landfills, and then there are garbages that are sort of they're the modern equivalent of the dumpster, right? It's picked up once a month by the garbage company. So now, if you there's no such thing as keeping a secret in a dumpster, right? Because you effectively by hiding something in a dumpster, it's going to be taken out when the dumpster is collected. That's effectively an aveda midas. If you try to hide something in a dumpster, you're effectively giving up ownership, because it could easily be carried away by the dump truck, and you'll have no way of getting it in the landfill. In a landfill, this is not true. In a landfill, you could hide something, because nobody's going to move it from there. So we're talking about a scenario that's in between a landfill and a dump truck. It's very, very rarely moved, but occasionally it's moved. And this guy started moving the trash to the distant landfill, and he finds something hidden. So now he doesn't know, should he touch it, should he not touch it? The answer is, of course, he's going to ruin it. It's going to be carried away to the landfill. So therefore, he should take it and he should announce it.
How do you know it's hidden? What tells you it's hidden and not just the guy accidentally lost it and it's...
The answer is exactly what you said. It's put in a scenario that it couldn't have been left there by accident. If it could have left there by accident, it's not hidden. For example, if you find an old jacket and you find $1,000 sewn into the liner, you could keep it.
Yeah.
Because even though the $1,000 in the liner is obviously put there intentionally, but the fact that there's a jacket that's dumped into a landfill there's nothing unique about that, right? However, if you find maybe a safe that's carefully, bolted down, covered up by some garbage, obviously that somebody's looking to hide something in a safe there, obviously because it's bolted down. And he just wants to cover it with garbage so that nobody looks for it. You happen to have found it. If you could presume that it was dropped there by the normal case of using a garbage dumpster, then it's not hidden. It was not put there intentionally. Or if it was, it probably doesn't make a difference anyway. Okay, so therefore, because it's in that environment, that's what we say. If it's majority non-Jews, some non-Jews going to find it, then you can take it and announce it. If it's majority Jews, then you take it and keep it. But if it's majority Jews, you take it and you announce it. Again, it was put there intentionally. If there's majority non-Jews present, then you presume the non-Jews will take it, so you can take it as well and keep it. If it's majority Jews, so then you keep it and you then you announce it, right? Okay, now we're on top of Chaf Daled Amud Beis. Another possibility is it could be the rabbi's opinion. Mikitani hein shaloi ein chayav lahachros katani v'niach v'yais Yisrael v'yavi b'simanu v'shakal. In other words, the rabbis never said. This is talking about majority non-Jews. Majority non-Jews, the rabbis say ein chayav lahachros. You're not obligated to announce it. Meaning, there's no obligation to announce it, but you are obligated that if somebody comes and knows that you found it, and he gives the siman, he gives the identifying feature, you would be obligated to return it. So in effect, we prove nothing, right? If it's the rabbi's opinion and the rabbis still say it doesn't belong to you, we haven't addressed the question, do the rabbis disagree with Reb Shimon or not? And in which context, majority Jews or majority non-Jews? Toshma, next attempt. The Omer Vasi explained, taught, Matzah chavis yayin be'ir, sharu b'kananim. Okay, so you have a barrel of wine in a city that's mostly non-Jewish. Muteris mishum mציעא, you're as a lost object, you're allowed to keep the wine. However, there's another problem here. Again, this is a city, so just to be clear here, there's a differentiation here between what we call yayin nesach and stam yainam. You'll often hear the two interchange because today's real yayin nesach is not as common, although it certainly does exist. What does that mean? Yayin nesach is pagan worship. Whether or not the wine, they do some sort of benediction in church or something, if you're Catholic, maybe something like that. So whether or not that's considered idol worship is sort of a question. Okay. However, and this in Talmudic times, the majority non-Jews is a majority pagans. So the wine there is considered wine that was either dedicated, set aside, or used for idol worship, and therefore it is prohibited to derive benefit from it, as anything that's used for idol worship. In modern times, the wine would not be prohibited to derive benefit, because the wine is probably stam yainam, unless it's the church wine or something. I don't know. Stam yainam is wine that's not used by pagans.
Like you can sell it but not drink it. Is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It is prohibited to derive benefit. So now again, you find the barrel of wine in a non-Jewish city, can't derive benefit from it, but technically speaking, you can keep it. Well, what exactly are you keeping if you can't derive benefit? We'll get to it. Okay. You have a Jew that comes along and he gives an identifying feature. So then you know, okay. So now, because he lost in the public domain, he's given up on it. So effectively, the item is still, you can still keep the barrel of wine, but now that the Jew gives a siman, now you can drink it as well. Right? Because it's Jewish wine at this point. Kamma, which opinion is this like? It goes by majority. We see that Reb Shimon ben Elazar made a statement by majority non-Jews, but by majority Jews. Let's say the same town was majority Jewish. So then he would not give the same statement. The fact that he limits his statement just to majority non-Jews indicates that by majority Jews, he wouldn't be able to keep it. So the Gemara says, not necessarily. Reb Shimon Elazar was talking about even majority Jews. Rav Asi is the one who disagrees. Rav Asi says the halacha follows the opinion by majority non-Jews, but does not follow his opinion by majority Jews. So by majority Jews, if you find a lost object with a siman, you can keep it. By majority Jews, if you find a lost object with a siman, you cannot keep it.
The case where a Jew came along and gave identifying marks, it was now permitted for drinking. Does that mean the person who found it can keep it?
Yes, absolutely.
But if the Jew identified it, why can't he take it back?
Because he lost in a majority non-Jewish place, so he's given up hope of getting it back. So I appreciate the siman because now I know that it's kosher wine, but it's still mine. And that's sort of the whole idea of the proof. The proof is that because it's majority non-Jews, that's why he's given up on it. But if the majority Jews, he would not have given up on it.
When they talk about a city,
Mm-hmm.
is that the same definition as if an Erev Tchum or
Probably not.
the city?
Probably more what's customary to be called a city. Yeah. Okay. 1 second. Okay, okay. So now the Gemara gets to the other point. If the guy cannot derive benefit from the barrel that's prohibited, then why is he taking the barrel in the first place? Finds a barrel of wine. He can't drink the wine. He has to pour it down, pour it down the drain and not have any benefit from it. So then why is he taking it? So the Gemara says, Amravashi lekankana, he's taking the barrel.
Well, I was, okay, I've been a little slow on the off the gun here. I know you have a obligation to hold on to what appears to be a lost object. I mean, if as a Torah, you come across a lost object.
So the answer is only a lost object that you're obligated to return it.
Say what?
Only a lost object that you're obligated to return. So we spoke about this in last week, Monday or Tuesday. There's a hekesh. Whatever you're allowed to pass by, you're allowed to keep. And and whatever you're obligated to return, you're not allowed to pass by.
Yeah. So
what are you obligated to return? Something that the owner is still looking for. He hasn't been miyash. He hasn't given up on it. And also, it would have to be something that belongs to a Jew. If it belongs to a non-Jew, you're allowed to keep it. So, So in the case of majority non-Jews, in the case of majority non-Jews, Shimon also says, go by majority. Who lost this object? Somebody from the majority. Who's that? A non-Jew? A non-Jew, you're allowed to keep you're allowed to keep their lost objects. Now, if the guy gives a simon, so then we have to invoke a different principle, which is the principle of Yush. Because he lost it in a city that has majority non-Jews, and he knows that the guy who finds it is going to attribute it to the majority non-Jews. So effectively, he's given up hope of getting it back.
Except that he found it.
What?
Except that he.
Yeah, but that wasn't the expectation of the loser.
Right.
Perchance they happen to meet, but it doesn't.
That's the strain.
The operating principle the loser would consider is that a non-Jew found it and kept it.
Right.
A guy found 4 coins in a bag, and it was thrown in a river called the Nahar Biron. Also, the commander of Yehudah, so he went to Rav Yehudah. Rav Yehudah told him, "Zil achras." You have to go announce that you found the lost objects. So the Gemara says in second, this is like Zut Shalyam. Zut Shalyam is sort of when the tide comes in and sweeps everything away. You might get lucky and the tide might put it back, but you also probably won't get lucky and the tide will probably carry it somewhere else. Okay. So the guy tells Rav Yehudah, he says, I don't understand. Why do I need to return it? I found it in a river. Like, come on, How does the guy have any chance of getting the lost item back? If the guy lost something in a river, there's no hope of getting it back.
Well, but the object is truly a significant financial or
True.
sentimental value.
True.
That an individual will hope against all reason that somehow.
So hope against all reason is not going to be sufficient. The general principle here is called Bata Da'at Yetzer Kol Adam. In other words, there are always going to be, in every context of sort of what's normal, there will always be exceptions. There's always, normalcy exists obviously on a spectrum with obviously the bulk of people recognized in the middle. No, I'm sorry. It's not normalcy. It's what people aspirations will exist on a spectrum, right? And the answer is we don't look at aspirations. We look at normal, which is going to be the tightly controlled middle area of the spectrum. Well, yeah, something like that. No more than a certain amount of standard deviations from the median. And therefore, even though one, the guy might be the type to hire the submarine, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. If you talk to most normal people, they'd say, "What's the story with this? Is this normal or not?" They'd say it's not normal. Then it's not normal, and he's lost it anyway, even if he could afford a submarine. What's that thing? Alvin Jr. Is that the founder on the Titanic?
Oh.
I think so. Jason Jr. Alvin, I think, was the mothership. Jason Jr. I think was the remote piloted vehicle, RPV. Okay. Anyway, it doesn't make a difference whether you can afford one of these Alvins or it doesn't make a difference. That's not how the halacha works. And by the way, that principle refers to a lot of things. Like, for example, on Shabbos, you have to carry something significant. There's different shiurim, different measurements for different amounts. It doesn't make a difference what you individually consider something significant. It's what most normal people consider significant. Okay, so the question is this Nahar Biron. Why is this guy? The guy's crazy, right? He's looking for. He thinks that he's not going to find. He thinks he's going to find his lost object in the river. What's going on here? Why do you have to return it? The Gemara says, Nahar Biron was different. Shine Nahar Biron, keep it in Maskel, loy miyash. Nahar Biron was very unique because they set up a lot of traps to catch fish. So basically, everything gets caught up in the nets. It's interesting. I was once on the Delaware River, and apparently they have an issue with electric eels there. So they create these special traps across the river. It allows boats to flow through, but doesn't allow electric eels to flow through. They sort of dam up 3/4 of each side of the river, but they alternate. And the eels don't alternate sides of the river. Apparently they get caught in the traps.
How shocking.
I'm sorry?
How shocking.
Yeah. So this idea would be sort of relevant there, because in that case, everything would flow into a trap and it would automatically get caught in a net. Moreover, we'll see in a second, it's not even that, it's more than that. Okay, so the Gemara says, what about the fact that there's majority non-Jews? You see from here that even when there's majority non-Jews, the halacha does not follow the opinion of Rav Shimon Elazar, because over here it's majority non-Jews, and we're still saying you don't get to keep it. So the Gemara says, no. The Jews are the ones that are damming it and that are dredging it out. They're putting up the traps and they're cleaning them out. So it's going to be found by a Jew. And therefore the guy does not lose hope of finding the item. Even the Yisrael Sachrei Em Yisrael Nafel. The Kiman the Yisrael Korelei Loy Miyash. Because the Jews are setting the traps, then when they find it, they'll think that a Jew that was setting the traps was the one who lost it. He lost the money. And because the Jews are dredging it out and cleaning up the traps, they're going to think they will return the lost object when they find it. So Nahar Biron is this unique exception. Rabbi Yehudah have a shock of Azal Basrei Mar Shmuel b'Shuka. Rabbi Yehudah b'Daisa. So Rabbi Yehudah was traveling with Mar Shmuel in the marketplace of Daisa. Daisa is a type of cereal. It's like sort of a ground wheat, like a whole kernel, but it's not ground to flour. So it's used as a cereal. Apparently there were a lot of rabbis there, so that would frequent this cereal marketplace. So Amar Lei says, "Matzukan Arniki Mao." If the guy found a wallet here, what would the halacha be? Amar Lei Harei Shaloi. It would be his. What happens if a Jew gave a siman? What would the story be? Amar Lei Chayav Lahachzor. You'd have to give it back. So he says, "Taratin, you can keep it, but if a guy gives a siman, you have to give it back." What's going on here? Amar Lei Lefnim Mishur Sadin. You'd have to give it back, not because of the letter of the law, but because you have to behave more than the letter of the law. The letter of the law is you can keep it, which is why you don't have to announce it. But if a Jew you happen to know for certainty it belongs to a Jew, you'd have to return. You should return it. Similarly, the father of Shmuel found these donkeys in a desert. Rashi explains that he found these donkeys 12 months after they were lost. How did he know it was 12 months ago? I don't know. Maybe that their horns were bigger or something. Maybe they weren't short or something like that. I'm not sure how he figured that out. But he knew that and now in that case, for certain, the owner was miyash. He gave up. Nobody would lose donkeys in a desert and not give up on them. Donkeys, goats. I'm sorry, donkeys. They don't have horns. So whatever it is. Ear, whatever it is, you can tell that they were wandering for a very, very long time. The owner was given up, and he returned it anyway. Okay, Rava was following Rav Nachman b'Shuka de Galdoi in the marketplace of tanners. In the marketplace of scholars. Interesting terminology there. He says, if I find a wallet here, what's the story? You can keep it. What happens if a Jew gives a siman, an identifying feature? What's the story? But still keep it. The Gemara says, the guy's screaming that it's his, right? It's his ID. He lost it in the marketplace, but he's screaming it's his. He has the proof. So the Gemara says, it's like a guy screams over his house that's falling down. Doesn't stop the house from falling down. Same thing is true of his ship that's falling in the ocean. There was this bird that carried a piece of meat from the marketplace. It dropped off the meat. How did they in the palm trees of Bar Marion? So like a hawk or a crow or something grabbed a piece of meat and dropped it off in somebody's palm trees. The bias of Bar Marion comes to bias. Says, what's the story? Enjoy it. What about the fact there's majority Jews? This clearly indicates the halacha follows of Shimon Elazar. So Gemara says, no, Shaina Diyad Yiksuda Shayam Dami. Once a guy sees a crow making off with his meat, he doesn't have too many hopes of getting it back. Technical problem. What about the fact that the halacha is that if you lost track of the meat, you can no longer eat it, right? You lose track of kosher meat, you can't eat it anymore. So obviously, Gemara says no. They saw the crow flying away with it, and they saw the crow landing in the area of Bar Marion, so they didn't lose sight of it. Rav Chanina found a slaughtered goat between Tveria and Tzipori. And he said you can enjoy it. You can presume it was kosher. He permitted it. Rav Ami explains that they permitted it as a lost object, like the opinion of Shimon Elazar, meaning this majority non-Jews. Mishum shchita, and they permitted it as a slaughtered animal. Like the story of Rav Chananya, the son of Rabbi Dovid. The Tanya we learned. A guy lost his goats and his birds, and he found them slaughtered. Rabbi Yehudah says they're prohibited. In other words, because you cannot presume that they were slaughtered correctly. However, he said it was permitted. You could presume it was slaughtered correctly. Rebbe made a compromise. He says, I agree with Rabbi Yehudah when you found them in the garbage. Why? Because when you found them in the garbage, they're presumably not kosher. That's why they're in the garbage. However, and the opinion of Chananya when you found them in a Jew's house. Okay. Now, what are you saying? So yeah, so clearly here you'd have to presume that because the fact that it was found on the road, it just means the owner gave up on it. But if it was non-kosher, presumably it would not have even been on the road. But I certainly agree with you that is a tenuous extension of Rav Chananya, the son of Rabbi Dovid. Although I guess in all fairness, you'd say that is really the opinion of Rebbe. Rebbe is sort of putting these qualifiers on Rav Chananya. Because Rav Chananya himself would not put on the qualifiers, and this Gemara is going with Rav Chananya straight without the qualifiers of Rebbe. Okay, regardless. 1 second. Because they permitted the animal because of slaughter, then it must be Ruby Yisrael, where majority of Jews were present. The general principle here is that if a Jew says he knows how to slaughter, you can believe him. This halacha has changed slightly for Ashkenazi Jews since the 16 or 1700s, when there was a decree that was issued in Ashkenazi lands requiring anyone who wants to shecht to prove that they're capable of slaughter. And how you do that, you have to have a document. It's a separate discussion. I don't want to go there. But it is not, Sephardic Jews do not have that decree. The decree was only in the 4 lands. I think that was, I'm not even sure the names. I think it was Poland, Lithuania, Russia, Ukraine, and I don't know what the 4th one was. What?
Also
somewhere in that area. And basically, since then, Ashkenazi tradition has always been to require evidence of shechita. Technically speaking, the halacha does not require you. If you say anyone who says they're kosher to shechita is presumably kosher, because the majority of those that say they're kosher for shechita are indeed kosher for shechita. Okay, so clearly here, if there's majority Jews, then you could say that whoever slaughtered it was kosher for shechita. Right? That makes sense.
To learn how to do that and to have a proper knife.
Sure. And not only that, it was normal that only people that were experts were actually slaughtered it. It was much more of a local enterprise. They didn't have reefers to carry their stuff around the country. Okay. Okay, so the Gemara says, Shemami na halakha of Shimon Elazar for the Rav Yisrael. Clearly, Rav Shimon Elazar says, you lose something in a public area, even if there's majority Jews, then you could still keep it. So clearly, Rav Shimon Elazar gave a statement, even by majority Jews. So Rava says, no, Rav Kinanim. Actually, the majority non-Jews. However, Rav Tavche Yisrael, if it was a slaughtered animal, it probably was slaughtered by a Jew who was probably kosher for slaughter. The non-Jews wouldn't necessarily kill their animals the same way we do, with the same type of slaughter. Rabbi Ami Ashkach Pargiyot Shchutot Ben Tveria Tzipori. Rav Ashi found these birds that were slaughtered between Tveria and Tzipori. Also, he went to Rav Asi, said, "What's the story?" It was in front of Rabbi Yochanan. He went straight to the study hall. They said, Zil shkol nafshach, go enjoy it. Okay, he found the materials used to make nets in the area where they make these nets to catch animals. Also, he went to Rabbi Yehudah, some say he went to the study hall of Amrlay, and they said to him, Zil shkol nafshach, that constitutes a public place, and you can keep it. I guess my presumption here is that they would make these nets in these sort of gathering of net makers, or whatever someone who makes a net is called. And therefore it's sort of a public area, majority non-Jews, and therefore you can keep it. Okay, so now, until now, we spoke on most of the things that you don't need to announce. Let's begin talking about things that you do need to announce. These are things you do have to announce. Matzah peres b'kli, you find fruit in a vessel. Kli k'mayshehu, or you find a vessel as is. In other words, an empty vessel. Or you find mois b'kis, you find money in a wallet, kis k'mayshehu, or you find just a wallet. Tzivure peres, you find a pile of fruit. We'll talk about the specifics in the Gemara. Tzivure mois, a pile of money. Or shloshim atbe'ez zel gavsat, you find 3 coins that pile up on top of each other. We'll talk about the specifics of that. Kriches b'shus hayachid, you find small bundles of wheat in private. Nikikar shel balabayitz, a loaf of bread belonging to a private baker. The gizet tzemer lakuchim beis uman, or you find tufts of wool that were bought from a professional. Kade yayin, barrels of wine. Kade shemen, barrels of oil. Harei elu chayav l'hachar. These are the things you must announce. We already explained barrels of wine and barrels of oil. They have these special simonim because of the way that they were sealed. Keep going for another 2-3 minutes. 3 minutes left. It's 55.
Stop a little early.
Yeah. Okay. Let's continue for a second. And we'll stop. Time of the matzah peres b'kli u'mois b'kis. The reason here is because you found fruit in. Stop. Okay. Happy Purim. Oh, they're still reading Megillah? It's going to be late then. Let's see if there's anything posted. Hold on.
Question is, how late?
Hold on, maybe continue. It's going to be at least another few minutes, at least another 10 minutes. And you have access to the cameras there? You have access to the cameras there?
What?
No, you don't have access. Anyone has that? You have access?
I've got good feet. I'll do that.
What was I?
I've got good feet.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Okay, let's continue here. I suspected this was going to happen. Yeah, it was going to be tight. It was going to be tight. Okay, we'll find out. Okay, again, Chaf Hayam Aleph 25a. We're at the Gemara. Time of the matzah peres b'kli u'mois b'kis. The reason, okay, so we spoke about you found money, you found fruits in a barrel or any other vessel, or money in a wallet. Hakli l'fan of my Paris, kiss l'fan of mice. Let's say you find fruit with a vessel next to it, money, and right next to it's a wallet. So what's the story then? Harei lo shaloi. The implication of the Mishnah is that you're able to keep it, and we'll sort of deal with this. But we're going to give a number of different possibilities of how to resolve this question. Gemara says, "Tinina lahad Tanur Rabbanan." We learned this in a brisa. Matzah kli l'fan of Paris. You found a vessel and there's fruit in front of it. Kiss a wallet with l'fan of mice and there's money in front of it. Harei l'shalai, you're allowed to keep it. However, miksasan b'kli miksasan agabe karka. You find a barrel with some apples in it, and there's also apples right next to the barrel. You find a wallet with 20s, and there's also 20s around the wallet. So then, what do you presume? Chayav l'hachris. So then you have to announce that you presume the money fell out of the wallet. So Gemara says, "Baraminu." I'll ask you a question. What's the davar sheyesh by simin? Mitzad davar sheyesh by simin. Chayav l'hachris. Okay, so you find something that does not have an identifying feature, money, next to something that does have an identifying feature, right? A wallet.
mhm.
You have to chayav l'hachris. You have to identify it.
No, they're getting towards the end of the Megillah, so.
Get another 10 minutes. Okay. Yeah, we'll
We're
finish.
finish up.
We'll finish at 8:03. What?
We're gonna still gotta finish up.
Yeah. I have another 5 minutes after we go.
They got
Bounce.
crowd forming a lot of there, too.
Yeah.
Unless we start in the 10th.
Yeah, we still probably have another 5-6 minutes. We'll finish like 8:03. Okay. So Babal Simon Venotal Es Shalai. One second. Okay. Babal Simon Venotal Shalai. Zacha Hala B'Dover She'em by Simon. Okay, so now what happens? The guy gives a simon for the wallet, but not for the money. So then what happens? The guy finds the money next to the wallet. So he announces the wallet. The guy comes, gives a simon to the wallet, and he doesn't acknowledge that there was money in it. So then you can keep the money. Clearly the money wasn't part of the wallet. Okay. 1 second. Okay, now the problem here is that you have to announce the money in the wallet. You have to hold on to the money that was next to the wallet until the guy comes and only identifies the wallet. That seems to contradict the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you have to find the money in the wallet, or at least part of the money in the wallet. But if you find a wallet next to money, then the money you keep, and the wallet, if you find an owner, you find it. You find them, if not. So Amar Zvid, so now the Gemara tries to give a number of different resolutions. So Zvid's first resolution is Habekuba Bekisna Habetzano Peri. Basically, the idea is as follows. 1 second. Okay. We're talking about something that, so the first one is, let's say, flax or wool, basically. If you had a barrel of wool, and even if it spilled, you'd be able to tell that this was a barrel of wool. It would sort of stick behind, like something that wouldn't be able to be completely empty. So, for example, you have a bucket of apples, right? Mm-hmm. You pour out the apples, you have no clue what I use the bucket for, right? But if I had a bucket of honey, you had to tell for a long time that this was a bucket of honey, right? The same thing is true if it was some other sticky substance or something that would grab onto splinters. So
stems of the apple might be falling out in the basket too.
Yeah, well, those would have fell out too. If the bucket was turned over, they would have fell out also. And what? Here it doesn't fall out. Yeah, very good. Here would be a good example. Here would sort of get stuck to the edges. Because we're talking about with the barrel. You're right. If the barrel had stems of apples, I would say that's called shire. That's called when you have half and half. Because you could tell that this was an apple barrel. But if there's here in the bucket, if there's no here in the bucket, and there's here next to the bucket, obviously the here wasn't from the buckets. So that's the first resolution. So in other words, can you tell that the bucket, if the item that was next to the bucket clearly should have left its mark in the bucket, and there is no mark in the bucket, obviously you can keep it. Right? In other words, if you find wool next to the bucket and the bucket has no hairs in it, it's clearly not from the bucket. There's no question you keep it. That's the Mishnah. What are we talking about where you have to announce it? That's where you have the bucket and you have the apples. So it's legitimate to say that the apples did not leave anything behind when they fell out of the bucket. That's the first resolution. The resolutions here, by the way, get more and more favorable for the finder. This is not so favorable. We'll continue. Papa says, we're talking about fruits, apples. If there's an apple that's left in the bucket, then you have to announce both the bucket and the apples next to it. If there's nothing left in the bucket, you're not obligated to. There's nothing left in the bucket. So if you find the bucket's turned over like this, right, and you have the apples rolling right out of it. So it's sort of intuitive. You could think that the bucket tipped over and the apples rolled out. So then you have to announce both of them. But if on the other hand, the bucket's facing this way and the apples are rolled out that way, so then you don't presume that it came from the bucket and you can keep the apples. Another possibility is in both scenarios, the opening of the bucket was facing the apples. However, the question is, did the bucket have a rim to it? If it had a rim, it would have caught some apple. It would not be possible for every apple to fall out. So if there was no rim and every apple fell out, so then you have to announce both of them, because you presume the apples fell from the bucket. But if the bucket does have a rim and still is empty, then you presume the apples are not from the bucket. You announce the bucket and you get to keep the apples. Okay. Let's see the next two lines and we'll stop. Tzvure Paris, utzvure mois. Piles of fruit or money. Shma mina. We see from here, a minion have a simon. Well, if you have a pile of fruit, how exactly are you going to give a simon? It's just fruit. The answer is the number, the quantity, right? Clearly, the quantity is a simon. Mm-hmm. So the Gemara says, Tani. The Gemara says, Tani tzavar Paris. Say that the pile was 1 second. The pile was sort of in a designated location. It was not measured. Okay, well then, if that's the case, the designated location is now the simon. So the Gemara says, Tani Tzvur Paris, say that it was actually quantity that's a siman. So let me just explain here. In other words, there's two possibilities of siman here. There's no unique feature. The uniqueness is either the number, the quantity, or its weight, and or the location where it was placed. So now, which one is it? We know for sure it's one of these two, because that would be the only way to identify this pile of fruit. Which one is it? We don't know which one it is, because the Mishnah can both be interpreted each direction. If I tried to prove to you that the Mishnah was the quantity, you tell me the Mishnah's location. If I tried to prove the Mishnah's location, you tell me the Mishnah's quantity. So we know one of the two work, we don't know which one. Okay. Further comparison.